Donald Trump has taken the lead in the national average. He's ahead by 0.1% and is on track to win the popular vote, something no Republican has done since 2004. I mean, this is disastrous for the Harris campaign. If she doesn't win the popular vote by at least 3 points, she has no chance of actually winning the election. And there's never been a point throughout this cycle where Harris has led nationally by 3%. She has been ahead, though, basically since she entered the race. But now, with the election just 9 days away, Trump has retaken the lead. If you compare where Harris needs to be to where she actually is right now, there is a huge discrepancy. Right now, we see Harris at this R+0 to R+1 range, where Donald Trump has a 98.3% chance of winning the Electoral College. This is according to Nate Silver. And one thing to note, though, is that these polls always overestimate Democrats. I mean, in 2016, Clinton led by 5.4. She won the popular vote by 2. In 2020, Joe Biden led by 7.8. He won the popular vote by 4. And so if you compare where Harris is today to where Biden was 4 years ago, last time around, Biden was at this D+4 to D+5 range. He had a 95% chance of winning the Electoral College with his popular vote victory. I mean, Kamala Harris needs to be at least at a +2 to +3 range, but right now, she is literally underwater. She couldn't be in a worse position going into this election. And so in this video, we'll be taking a look at my updated 2024 electoral map forecast in the best case scenario for Donald Trump. And so we're just gonna get right into it. We're gonna start off in the Midwest, which is the most important region in the entire country. We'll begin from the left in Minnesota. This is Governor Tim Walz's home state. It's a state that Kamala Harris absolutely cannot lose. If Minnesota is even close, she has no chance of winning the election. Now, Biden did do well in 2020, but today Harris is pulling ahead by just 3 to 4 points, and Minnesota can get very competitive. Hillary Clinton actually came within 2 points of losing the state entirely since 2016, and keep in mind, this is a state that no Republican has carried since Richard Nixon in 1972, and so right off the bat, in Donald Trump's best case scenario, he certainly can win Minnesota. I mean, look at how close he came back in 2016, and in 2016, Hillary Clinton was polling much better than Kamala Harris is today. Next up in Wisconsin, this is another major key state, and yes, it is another state that Kamala Harris must win. In fact, she has to win Illinois, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, along with Minnesota, if she wants to have any chance, and you can see here clearly that at this point, her odds have gone down the drain. So, looking at polling in Wisconsin, Donald Trump has actually taken the lead. He's ahead by 0.2. But what you have to remember is that in 2020, polls had Joe Biden winning the state by 8 points. He eventually carried it by a pathetic 0.6% margin. I mean, it was supposed to be a likely blue state. Joe Biden was supposed to run away with it, but ultimately, it was the third most competitive race in the entire country. Now that Trump is actually in the lead in the polling average, there's no doubt he is going to win Wisconsin. It is going to be lean Republican. Next up, in Michigan, things don't get any better for Kamala Harris here either. She's behind in the polls. Trump leads by 0.2%, and just like in Wisconsin, polls heavily overestimated Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden in the last 2 elections. Trump leading in the polls here is a super clear sign that he is going to come out on top. Michigan was the most liberal of all 7 swing states back in 2020. It voted for Joe Biden by 2.8%. Nevada was the only other lean state that today is considered a battleground, and Biden carried that race by 2.4. So if Michigan falls in favor of Trump, Kamala Harris's campaign is over. There's really no other state she can win if she can't even pull off Michigan first. And so Michigan, just like neighboring Wisconsin, is also going to be lean Republican. Trump can definitely win these 2 races by anywhere from 2 to 5 percentage points in his best case scenario. Before we continue, the reason why Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania are known as the Blue Wall states is because from 1992 all the way until 2012, these 3 states consistently voted for Democrats in every single presidential election. It was Donald Trump that broke that streak in 2016. Joe Biden did win the 3 states back narrowly in 2020, but the last time that Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania didn't all vote for the exact same candidate was the election of 1988, and I do not expect this pattern to be broken in 9 days. Donald Trump is going to win Pennsylvania as well. He leads by 6%. In fact, I have Trump performing better in Pennsylvania than both Michigan and Wisconsin. So Pennsylvania is also going to be lean Republican on this map. And now to finish off the lower Midwest, Indiana is obviously going to be safe red. Illinois could be solid blue, but in a worst case scenario for Kamala Harris, it's definitely going to fall down into the likely category. And then in Iowa and Ohio, we have 2 states that could be likely or maybe even could be solid in Trump's best case scenario. Now just look at how significant this shift was back in 2016. In 2012, Obama carried Iowa by 5.8%. And then just 4 years later, a Republican wins Iowa by 9 points. That's a 15-point shift in favor of the GOP from 2016. And these 2 states have only been shifting further right ever since. And Kim Reynolds, the 2 governors of these states, won the re-elections by solid 20-point margins in 2022. And so right now, I do have Iowa and Ohio both as being safe Republican. And so in the Midwest, Donald Trump is going to carry 7 of the 8 states. We're now going to move up to the Northeast, which should traditionally be a solid blue stronghold. I mean, these are all races that Joe Biden carried by 15 percentage points or more, but Kamala Harris is really going to struggle. There are only a handful of safe blue states here. We have the 1st District of Maine, Vermont, Massachusetts, Maryland, and the District of Columbia. That is literally it. Just 3 states and 2 districts. And so diving deeper into these other races, New York is going to be likely blue. Democrats are currently experiencing a 30-year low in terms of their support in the Empire State. Every Democrat since Bill Clinton in 1992 has won New York by a solid margin. Kamala Harris will be the first to not do so. Connecticut and Rhode Island are also going to be likely blue. They simply aren't as liberal as their northern neighbor. New Jersey and Delaware, same story here. I mean, Joe Biden's home state is going to be likely Democratic this time around. I mean, that would just be disastrous for Kamala Harris. If she cannot win all 5 of these states by solid margins, it's pretty unlikely she'll get to the White House. Up in New Hampshire and Maine, the races here are going to be even more competitive. New Hampshire is going to be a tilt blue state. It'll be one of the most competitive races in the entire country. I mean, Hillary Clinton almost lost New Hampshire. She carried it by just 0.3. Donald Trump can definitely perform that well again in the Granite State, while up in Maine, the 2nd District will be solid red in Trump's best case scenario, with the state as a whole being lean blue. Before we continue, I want to tell you guys about Polymarket, the world's largest prediction market, where you can track election results and instantly see who's leading. These odds react in real time to current events instead of days later like the polls. There's no bias or media spin, just pure data. Market odds reflect the collective analysis beliefs down south. We're going to fill in the entirety of the Sun Belt and then finish off the map with all of the other races out west. And so Donald Trump is going to dominate here in the South. He's basically going to win every single non-competitive race by a solid margin. Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia, and South Carolina. All of these states are going to be safe Republican. Virginia, however, is going to be slightly more competitive. This is going to be one of the closest races in the entire country. Joe Biden might have carried it by a 10-point margin back in 2020, but Republicans have made huge strides in the Commonwealth since. I mean, Glenn Youngkin, a Republican, was elected governor in 2021. The GOP also won the lieutenant governorship as well as the office of the Attorney General. They can definitely win in Virginia this time around. Polling shows Harris leading by less than 5 points. She is vulnerable, and the race is within the margin of error. In a best-case scenario for Donald Trump, he is going to flip Virginia and its 13 electoral votes. Next up, in North Carolina, this is one of the key swing states that Trump needs to win in his most basic path to 270 electoral votes. If he doesn't win states like Virginia, Minnesota, Wisconsin, he doesn't need those states. All he needs are the 3 states of Georgia, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania. That is his fastest way back into the White House. And And in North Carolina, he is polling quite well. Donald Trump leads by 0.8%, and this may not seem like that large of a margin, but throughout all of the 2016 election as well as all of the 2020 election, the polls the entire time had Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden leading. Donald Trump has never been on track to win North Carolina before, even though he won the state in both 2016 and in 2020. This is the only swing state he carried in both of the last two elections. He is obviously going to win it again. He can probably win it by up to 5 points this time. The Tar Heel state is going to be lean Republican. Trump is also going to do very well in Georgia, a state that Joe Biden actually won in the last election. This was the first time a Democrat has won Georgia since Bill Clinton in 1992. And I mean, Joe Biden was a strong candidate in 2020. He was the best person the Democratic Party could have nominated. Probably anyone else, I mean, especially Bernie Sanders, they all would have lost Donald Trump. Now, in 2024, Biden was a disaster. Trump probably wishes he was still running against him, but he's still doing incredibly against Kamala Harris. But in 2020, the only reason Joe Biden was able to win was because we had a worldwide pandemic as well as the biggest recession since 2008. And those two factors no longer exist. I mean, the economy is now a strong suit for Trump instead of the Democrats. And just by taking away those two factors that so strongly impacted the Democrats' victory in 2020, Donald Trump is no doubt going to win this election, and he's definitely going to win Georgia back, a state he carried by 5 points in 2016. Looking at the polls, he's actually ahead by a whopping 2.2%. Considering the polls always underestimate him, he'll be able to win this state by 5 to 7 points. Georgia is also going to be lean Republican. And then in Florida, this is a race where Republicans probably aren't going to win by a solid margin, even though some people may have expected me to put it into the safe red category. But Republicans did do well in the midterms. I mean, if you look at the performances for Ron DeSantis and Marco Rubio, DeSantis won his re-election as governor by 19.4%. In the Senate elections, Marco Rubio won his re-election by 16.4%. And yes, these were incredibly strong finishes for the GOP, but the presidential race is simply going to be more competitive. Trump carried Florida by 3.4%, but the state has definitely shifted significantly more to the right ever since. Trump's probably going to win it by a double-digit margin. It's going to be likely red on the map, but placing it in the solid category is still a bit of a stretch. We're now going to continue on and fill in the western half of the Sun Belt, starting in the Lone Star state of Texas, a state that no Republican has lost since 1976. It's a Republican stronghold, one that Trump won by 6 points in 2020 and 9 in 2016. Admittedly, Trump's performances in Texas haven't been the best. Mitt Romney carried the state by 15 points back in 2012. Now, in Trump's best case scenario, though, Donald Trump can definitely win the state for the first time by a solid margin against Kamala Harris. He's leading by around 10 points in the polls. Polls always underestimate him. I mean, the polls had Donald Trump winning Texas by 1% back in 2020. He carried it by 6 times that margin. If the polls show him leading by 10, he can definitely win the race by 15. So Texas is going to be solid for Trump for the very first time. We also have Colorado and New Mexico, two races that are going to be incredibly competitive. Colorado is going to be lean blue with Kamala Harris winning the race by somewhere around 3 to 5 points. It's going to be competitive. It's going to be a big drop off from Biden's 2020 margin when he won the race by nearly 14 points. New Mexico, though, is also going to be incredibly competitive. Now, I do not have the state as going towards Donald Trump. That simply isn't happening right now. It's still a race that Joe Biden won by 11 points in the last election. It would be completely unrealistic for me to say that New Mexico is going to go to Trump. Now, I definitely see it being very competitive, especially as Hispanic voters are shifting away from the Democratic Party. Maybe in 2 or 3 election cycles, it can go red, but for right now, it's going to be tilt blue. It's going to be close, but Kamala Harris still maintains a very slight edge. In Arizona, Donald Trump is also on track to win here. This is the 6th of the 7 swing states. Only Nevada remains after this. Looking at the polls, Donald Trump leads by 1.5%. It's a state where he's performing the second best, only behind Georgia. Arizona is going to go back into the Trump category after he lost it narrowly in 2020, but he was able to carry it by 3.5 back in 2016. Trump is probably going to win Arizona today by his largest margin ever, somewhere somewhere around a 4 to 5 point margin is definitely realistic in his best case scenario. So the state is also going to be lean Republican, and we have one final lean Republican state, and I think you guys know what that is. It is, of course, going to be the silver state of Nevada, a state that no Republican has won since 2004. Donald Trump lost Nevada in both 2016 and 2020 by the exact same 2.4% margin. This is a state that is shifting to the right. Republicans won the governorship here in 2022. It was very competitive, but Joe Lombardo did come out on top, defeating incumbent Governor Steve Sisolak. Now, in the Senate race, we did have a different result, with incumbent Senator Catherine Cortez Masto winning her re-election by less than 1%. So Nevada is definitely incredibly competitive, but Donald Trump does hold a very slight advantage, leading by 0.7% in the polls. So the silver state is going to go red for the first time in 20 years. And so with all the remaining states, it's pretty obvious what's going to happen. Kamala Harris is going to win Washington and Oregon by likely margins. They're simply not as liberal as California. She's also going to carry Hawaii and the 2nd District of Nebraska by a tilt margin. Meanwhile, all the remaining states will vote for Trump by 15 points or more. Alaska, Utah, Wyoming, Idaho, Montana, North and South Dakota, the remainder of Nebraska, as well as Kansas and Oklahoma. And so this will give Donald Trump 335 electoral votes in his best case scenario. Kamala Harris at just 203. Trump will sweep the 7 battleground states, as well as win Minnesota, a race that hasn't gone red since 1972, and Virginia, a state that's voted blue in every election since 2008. This would be a historic victory for the former president. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe right now for more content like this leading up to the election.